Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Hogwarts has always been seen as a magical place every child dreams of visiting. To be honest, many adults wouldn't say no to such a chance either. But behind the fairy tale beauty of the ancient castle lurk numerous threats. The movies only showed part of them. Moving staircases, the three-headed dog Fluffy, the basilisk hunting Muggleborns, the Whomping Willow, and of course the most dangerous sport of all, Quidditch. In reality, J.K. Rowling's books mention even more situations that could have easily turned into real tragedies. Today we'll recall the dangers that never made it to the screen but could have become deadly trials for the students. Number 1. The main threat: the students themselves. The most serious risk at Hogwarts is not magical creatures or poltergeists, but the students themselves. Every one of them carries a wand, and the ban on spells in the corridors is constantly broken. In the books, magical conflicts happen far more often than in the movies, and the hospital wing is rarely empty. Even the most ordinary quarrels ended with burns, curses, or paralyzed bodies. On trains without teacher supervision, scuffles often escalated into full-blown magical duels. Add fists into the mix, Harry, the Weasley twins, and others weren't shy about solving disputes with brute force. Number 2. Staircase traps. The castle's architecture seems designed to test children's endurance. The staircases change direction, confuse them, and force them to constantly search for new routes. Even worse, some steps vanish right underfoot. First years have a hard time memorizing these treacherous spots. Even older students sometimes fell into traps when they let their guard down for just a second. The books mention that not only scatterbrained Neville suffered from trick steps, but Harry himself too, whenever his thoughts were elsewhere. Number 3. The perilous journey to the castle. For first years, the introduction to Hogwarts begins with a boat ride across the lake. On the surface, it looks like a beautiful tradition, a first glimpse of the castle. But behind the romance lies real danger. The lake is deep and unpredictable. Even in calm weather, the crossing can end with someone falling into the water. One year, Colin Creevy's younger brother fell overboard, and only the giant squid's intervention saved him. In bad weather, during storms or gales, this tradition could easily have turned tragic, as dozens of boats are watched over by only one, Hagrid. Number 4. Peeves, the spirit of mischief. The poltergeist haunting the castle is another constant source of trouble. His pranks are rarely deadly, but injuries and frayed nerves are guaranteed. Peeves drops crutches on students' heads, topples furniture, and lurks around corners to hurl heavy objects. First years suffer the most, being unable to defend themselves. Even older students often avoid certain corridors if Peeves is on the prowl, and during Umbridge's reign he went completely wild, flooding floors and turning the school into chaos. Number 5. Hogwarts behind the scenes. The films only showed part of the dangers of the basilisk, the forbidden forest, and the forbidden third-floor corridor. But the books reveal far more details left out of the adaptations. Hogwarts remains a place where wonders and magic walk hand in hand, with constant threats, and every school year turns into a test of endurance, courage, and sheer luck. Number 5. The Forbidden Forest, deadly secrets at every step. The Forbidden Forest was never a playground. It was a wilderness where even Hagrid admitted he did not feel safe. Within its shadows lurked centaurs with tempers as fierce as their pride, packs of wolves and spiders the size of horses. Unicorns, the purest of creatures, were hunted and killed for their blood. The Forbidden Forest was full of the most dangerous creatures in the magical world. Many were so fierce that even Hagrid avoided them. Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. To wander too deep was to gamble with one's life. And yet, Hogwarts made the forest a place of punishment. Harry, Hermione, Neville, and Draco were all sent there in their first year, guided only by Hagrid and Fang. They stumbled upon a dying unicorn, its silver blood glistening on the forest floor, and faced Voldemort himself, feeding from the creature. The hooded figure reached the unicorn, lowered itself over the wound, and began to drink its blood. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. That was detention at Hogwarts, children sent unarmed into a forest crawling with monsters, where even death could be waiting behind the next tree. Number 6. Ghosts, not always harmless neighbours. Most of Hogwarts' ghosts were eccentric but harmless, nearly headless. Nick floated cheerfully through Gryffindor Tower while the Grey Lady whispered her secrets in the quiet corners of Ravenclaw. Yet not all spirits offered comfort. Some carried with them the weight of violent deaths, and their presence was far from gentle. The castle was a graveyard of memories, and the dead did not always rest peacefully. The Bloody Baron was the clearest reminder of this. Draped in a cloak stained with silvery blood, he moved through the dungeons like a shadow. Students lowered their voices when he passed. Even Peeves, who mocked professors without fear, bowed to the Baron's authority. His history was soaked in violence. He had murdered Helena Ravenclaw, the Grey Lady, and then taken his own life. He was covered in silvery bloodstains, and his eyes were wide and staring. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. To meet him alone in a dark corridor was to feel a chill deeper than any winter wind. And if the Bloody Baron inspired dread, what of the ghosts we never truly saw? The castle was ancient, built on secrets and tragedy. How many other spirits drifted unseen in its corridors? Some might only sigh or whisper, but others could haunt with far greater cruelty. Hogwarts was alive with echoes of the past, and its ghosts were not always kind companions. They were a reminder that death lingered close, and that the line between the living and the dead inside the castle was thinner than anywhere else. Number 7. Cursed objects and books. The Hogwarts Library was not only a place of knowledge, but also a chamber of hidden dangers. Beyond the ordinary shelves lay the restricted section, a collection so perilous that only older students with written permission could enter. The books there were alive in their own way. They whispered, hissed, and sometimes screamed. Sometimes you would find books that shrieked when opened, or others that tried to bite. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. These volumes were not meant for children. They were weapons disguised as parchment and ink. Harry himself discovered the terror of these cursed books in his first year. Under the cover of night, he crept into the restricted section with his father's cloak of invisibility. But the moment he opened one of the heavy tomes, the silence of the library shattered. A piercing scream echoed through the corridors, loud enough to wake the entire castle. He fled in panic, chased not by monsters, but by the very book he had dared to disturb. It was a moment that showed how curiosity alone could unleash chaos. And then there was Tom Riddle's diary, an innocent-looking journal that bewitched Ginny Weasley. Its magic drew her deeper and deeper until it nearly consumed her life. The diary was not just cursed, it was a fragment of Voldemort's soul. A single schoolgirl, unsuspecting and lonely, became its prisoner. Ginny poured out her soul to the diary, and the diary poured back into Ginny a little of its own. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. One book almost killed her, and it was only one among many. In Hogwarts, even knowledge could kill. Number 8. Secret passages, traps for the careless. The Marauder's map revealed what few dared to imagine. Hogwarts was riddled with secret tunnels. To young explorers, they seemed like doorways to adventure. In truth, they were dangerous passages, often unstable, dark, and filled with unknown threats. The Weasley twins used them to sneak into Hogsmeade, but even they admitted not every route was safe. Some collapsed long ago, others fell under Filch's watch, and one led straight into a place feared by the entire village. Harry learned this firsthand in his 3rd year. Desperate to visit Hogsmeade without permission, he crawled through a hidden passage beneath the one-eyed witch statue. The tunnel stretched for miles, damp and eerie, and finally emerged inside Honeydukes' cellar. It was thrilling, but also a reminder. One wrong tunnel could have led to disaster. Of the 7 secret passages known to us, 1 is caved in, 2 are watched by Filch, and the 4th leads directly into the Shrieking Shack, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. For anyone unprepared, that shack was not just haunted, it was a trap. The Shrieking Shack had a dark history. Built to contain Remus Lupin during his transformations, it was filled with the echoes of his howls. Villagers believed it cursed. For a careless student, stumbling into that tunnel on the wrong night could have meant meeting a werewolf. Lupin himself admitted the place was chosen for its isolation, to hide the horror of his condition. The fact that such a passage remained connected to the school showed just how perilous these shortcuts could be. Secret passages tempted students with escape and freedom, but they also concealed real dangers. Rocks could collapse, magical creatures could lurk in the shadows, and sometimes the exit itself was worse than the journey. To venture into those tunnels without knowledge or protection was to gamble with fate. The marauders might have used them for mischief, but for anyone else the price of curiosity could easily have been their life. Number 9. Magical plants. Enemies disguised as greenery. Herbology sounded harmless, rows of plants, greenhouses filled with soil and sunlight, and Professor Sprout guiding the students with a steady hand. But the truth was more sinister. Many of those plants could kill. They were not vegetables to be watered, but predators waiting for the wrong move. To study them was to step into danger with every lesson. The Devil's Snare was the first clear warning. When Harry, Ron and Hermione dropped through the trapdoor to guard the Philosopher's Stone, the plant nearly strangled them. Its coils wrapped around their arms and legs, tightening with every struggle. The Devil's Snare bound their hands and ankles, and Harry felt himself being dragged downward, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. If Hermione had not remembered the spell for fire, that plant would have ended their journey before it began. Mandrakes were no safer. Their cries could knock a person unconscious or even kill if heard without protection. Yet students in their 2nd year were required to handle them. Professor Sprout lined the greenhouse with earmuffs, treating the risk as routine. The moment they pulled the mandrakes out of their pots, they began to cry. Their cries were horrific, like the wail of a baby in pain. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. One slip, one missing earmuff, and a young wizard could have collapsed, lifeless, on the floor. And these were only the famous examples. The books hinted at blood-sucking shrubs, venomous vines, and flowers that released hallucinogenic clouds. Children as young as 11 faced them in class, expected to master their dangers. At Hogwarts, even a simple greenhouse was not safe. The plants were alive, cunning, and often cruel. To call herbology a school subject was true. To call it harmless was a lie. Number 10. Portraits with a temper. The portraits of Hogwarts were more than decorations. They breathed, spoke, and wandered from frame to frame. At first glance, this seemed enchanting. A lost student could ask for directions, or a lonely child could find a companion in a painted knight or lady. But these portraits were not loyal friends. They had tempers, they gossiped, and they chose when to help or when to shut a door in someone's face. The fat lady, who guarded the entrance to Gryffindor Tower, was infamous for her moods. She demanded passwords and refused entry even for the smallest mistake. Neville Longbottom suffered the most. "Password?" she asked sternly. "Pig snout," said Neville. "That was the password yesterday, my dear boy." Or, she cried indignantly, "Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone." For Neville, it meant another night of embarrassment stranded outside his own common room. One painting, with all its stubbornness, could control the safety of an entire house. But portraits were not just difficult. They could also fail completely. When Sirius Black slashed the fat lady's portrait in his hunt for Harry, Gryffindor Tower was left unprotected. The torn canvas and her terrified screams revealed how fragile that security truly was. The students had believed the guardian portrait was impenetrable. That illusion collapsed in an instant. The fat lady's portrait had been slashed, she was gone from her canvas, and all that remained were torn scraps of paint. Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. This moment proved the danger. Portraits were alive, but they were not shields. They could vanish, hide, or be destroyed. They carried grudges and loved drama. To live in Hogwarts meant to live under their watchful eyes, never sure whether they would protect you, betray you, or simply laugh while you begged to be let inside. Number 11. Filch and his instruments of torture. Argus Filch appears in the films as a grumpy, almost comical nuisance, always chasing after students with his cat, Mrs. Norris. But the books paint a far darker picture. He is not just an annoying caretaker. He is a squib, born to magical parents, but without powers himself. That bitterness twists into resentment. He envies the students and their effortless spells, and in his frustration he dreams of punishments that go far beyond detentions and essays. Inside his office, the truth is impossible to ignore. Chains, shackles, and manacles line the walls. They are not relics of the past. They are tools he wishes he could use. J.K. Rowling makes it chillingly clear. On the wall hung chains and manacles, and Filch regretted that their use had been discontinued. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Imagine standing in that cramped room as a nervous 11-year-old, the iron glinting in the firelight, while Filch smirks and mutters about the old ways. The idea that Hogwarts once allowed such punishments is disturbing enough. But what makes it worse is Filch's open longing to bring them back. When he catches Harry after the mud on the castle floor, or when he storms into a corridor at the sound of laughter, the fury in his voice is not about rules, it's about power. He wants the authority he can never have through magic. Without Dumbledore's restraint, the line between discipline and cruelty would blur in an instant. Consider how he reacts to Peeves, the poltergeist. He doesn't ask for order, he screams for permission to use the cane. Or his glee when Dolores Umbridge arrives at the school. Filch is ecstatic, whispering about chains returning to the dungeons. His character in the books is not the harmless buffoon of the films. He is a man who would happily see children shackled for muddy shoes. And that is a danger the few realize lurks in the very heart of Hogwarts. Number 12. Everyday objects gone wrong. When Ron Weasley's wand snapped during the events of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, readers were given a glimpse of how even the simplest tool could become a threat when it turned against its owner. That broken wand, held together with spellotape, betrayed him countless times, spewing out sparks, rebounding charms, and at one moment producing the humiliating disaster known as the slug-vomiting charm. Rowling writes, Ron pulled out his wand, sunshine, daisies, buttermellow. But the wand exploded with sparks and broke in two. Later, his own curse backfired, and he spent hours retching slugs into Hagrid's basin. What could have been just an amusing accident revealed a darker truth. A simple, everyday magical object could become dangerous enough to cause pain, embarrassment, and even long-term harm. The wand is meant to channel power safely, yet Hogwarts showed that once something is cracked or cursed, the danger is constant and inescapable. That lesson spread far beyond Ron's misfortune. Hogwarts itself was filled with items that looked safe but harbored hidden malice. The most notorious example, of course, was Tom Riddle's diary. To an untrained eye, it was nothing but an old, empty notebook tucked away in the belongings of a young girl. But in reality, it was one of Voldemort's Horcruxes, infused with a fragment of his soul and designed to manipulate, possess, and ultimately destroy. Ginny. Weasley, vulnerable and alone, confided in it innocently, never realizing that her thoughts were being stolen and her very will rewritten. The diary whispered back to her, convincing her to do terrible things. Rowling describes, It was as though Riddle was her best friend. He made her write things she was ashamed of, and the more she wrote, the more powerful he became. A child's private notebook became a weapon more dangerous than any curse cast in open battle. The presence of such an object inside the castle exposes a chilling reality. At Hogwarts, danger rarely came from duels or dark creatures alone. It often came from objects that blended into the everyday scenery. Unlike a dragon or a dementor, which could be recognized and fought, a diary, a mirror, or even a book could infiltrate a student's life quietly and strike when least expected. Consider the example of the Mirror of Erised. While not cursed in the traditional sense, Dumbledore himself admitted its power was perilous. Harry became so entranced by its visions of his lost family that he spent night after night in front of it, forgetting meals, forgetting classes, forgetting reality. As Dumbledore later explained, "It does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live, remember that." The mirror never inflicted physical wounds, yet its grip on the mind was as binding as any chain, showing how even an object designed without malice could become a snare for the vulnerable heart. In the darker corners of the library, the threat grew sharper. The restricted section housed volumes that hissed, shrieked, and even bit at the hands of those reckless enough to open them. Harry discovered this firsthand when he tried to investigate Nicholas Flamel late at night. The book he opened screamed so loudly that it nearly brought Filch running, an alarm system wrapped in leather binding. And then there was the Monster Book of Monsters, assigned innocently enough by Hagrid as required reading. To most students, it was a nightmare, snapping covers, sharp teeth, and pages that had to be forced apart only after stroking the book's spine like a dangerous pet. It may have been classified as a school book, but it acted more like a predator. What kind of education asks children to risk their fingers simply to complete an assignment? Even furniture at Hogwarts proved unreliable. The infamous vanishing cabinet, hidden in the room of requirement, and once stored in Borgin and Burke's, looked like an ordinary piece of woodwork. But this cabinet was a portal waiting to be exploited, one that eventually allowed Death Eaters to infiltrate the school itself. Its twin in Nocturne Alley created a bridge between safety and terror. What appeared to be a forgotten storage item became the very tool that brought violence into the castle's heart. Similarly, trick staircases that shifted without warning could strand students for hours or trap them in perilous positions. A simple flight of stairs is supposed to guide the traveller upward, but in Hogwarts they betrayed trust with each step, reminding students that nothing could be taken for granted. The dangers were not only grand but often intimate, lurking in the smallest corners of daily life. Even a quill could conceal harm. Rita Skeeter's enchanted Quick quotes, "Quill had no teeth or claws, but it twisted every word spoken into a cruel parody of truth." Hermione Granger seethed as she realized how easily Harry's words were being weaponized, reshaped into scandalous headlines. The quill's danger was not physical, but reputational, ruining trust and sowing doubt. It showed that in a world built on magic, even tools meant. For writing or learning could become sources of fear. Cursed jewelry brought this danger to an even sharper edge. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Katie Bell became the victim of a necklace she never intended to touch. Handed to her in Hogsmeade, she was only the messenger, yet the instant she brushed the package, she was cursed into agony. Rowling describes, "Her eyes rolled in her head and she fell to the ground, rigid and jerking. A simple trinket meant to be beautiful became a vessel of death." And though the attack was orchestrated by Malfoy under Voldemort's orders, the object itself was the weapon. No duel was needed, only a single touch was enough to cripple. Number 13. School pets, cute or deadly? At first glance, the world of Hogwarts seems safe enough, with its ancient walls, enchanted ceilings, and the ever-watchful eyes of its professors. Yet beneath the polished charm lies an overlooked danger, the school's policy of allowing students to keep pets. Owls, cats, and toads are presented as loyal companions, harmless additions to a young witch's or wizard's journey. But when examined more closely, these creatures introduce layers of risk the films gloss over. The Harry Potter books reveal the unsettling truth. Even the tamest pet could conceal menace, either through magical abilities, hidden identities, or unpredictable instincts. The case of Ron Weasley's rat, Scabbers, illustrates this peril vividly. What appeared to be a sluggish, ordinary rodent was in fact Peter Pettigrew, a Death Eater and animagus hiding in plain sight. For years, this supposed pet lurked in the heart of Gryffindor Tower, sharing dormitories with Harry, Ron, and Neville. The danger was never theoretical. This rat was a living spy, carrying secrets of Voldemort's return and directly tied to the betrayal of Harry's parents. Rowling herself leaves no ambiguity when the truth surfaces. "Ron, you've been sleeping with him in your bloody pocket," snarled Sirius Black in Prisoner of Azkaban. The films touched this revelation lightly, but the books emphasized the horror of realizing a child had unknowingly harbored a murderer. The very system that encouraged children to bring animals into the castle enabled this deception. If Scabbers proved how deadly an innocuous creature could be, Crookshanks demonstrated how volatile even a loyal pet might become. Hermione's half-Kneazle cat possessed uncanny intelligence and instincts that often put him at odds with other students' animals. The text paints him as an unpredictable presence, always calculating, always hunting. Rowling writes, "Crookshanks leapt onto Ron's lap and tried to seize the struggling rat with his claws." Prisoner of Azkaban. For Hermione, Crookshanks became an ally, even helping reveal Pettigrew's true identity. But for Ron, the cat was a constant source of stress and aggression. The danger here was subtler than Pettigrew's betrayal. Crookshanks embodied the reality that magical animals, however loyal, carried instincts that could endanger other pets or students. It is telling that Hogwarts rules never seem to account for the predatory nature of one student's pet toward another. The wider question emerges, what if a creature more threatening than a Kneazle cross was smuggled into the school? Hagrid's well-documented love for monstrous beasts makes this prospect chillingly plausible. In Philosopher's Stone, he admitted, "Bought him off a stranger I met down the pub. Seemed glad to be rid of him, as a matter of fact." The him was Norbert, a Norwegian ridgeback dragon. Though the narrative treats Norbert as a chaotic misadventure, the implications are terrifying. A baby dragon inside a dormitory tower full of children is not a humorous inconvenience, it is a lethal hazard. The films glossed over this danger with light-hearted tone, but the books make clear how quickly disaster could have unfolded. Norbert bit Ron, nearly poisoned him, and grew too large for concealment in a matter of weeks. If a dragon could so easily slip past the school's safeguards, what other horrors might lurk in students' trunks or under Hagrid's cloak? Owls, considered the safest of all permitted pets, are not without their own risks. They fly across vast distances carrying private letters that could fall into enemy hands. They also exhibit independent will that makes them difficult to control. Hedwig, Harry's snowy owl, was loyal beyond measure, but even she became a liability. In Order of the Phoenix, Umbridge intercepted Harry's mail, and Hedwig was injured delivering letters to Sirius. The bird, meant to symbolize safety and connection, became a vulnerable target, endangering Harry's secret communication with the outside world. Every owl in Hogwarts thus represented not just a messenger, but a potential breach in security. Toads, often mocked as the dullest choice of pet, may seem harmless but carry their own set of risks. Trevor, Neville. Longbottom's perpetually escaping toad became an almost comic fixture, yet the underlying fact remained. Trevor roamed freely around the castle grounds, disappearing into unknown corners. What might Trevor have encountered or brought back with him? In a school filled with secret passages, cursed artifacts, and forbidden creatures, a wandering amphibian could serve as a vector for danger. While the narrative treats Trevor's escapes with light humor, the sheer unpredictability of such a pet underscores the lack of Hogwarts foresight. Even the magical properties of some pets remain underestimated. Crookshanks's nasal heritage gave him the ability to sense dishonesty and hidden identities, which proved invaluable in exposing Pettigrew. But if Neasels could detect secrets, what other magical creatures might students sneak in under the guise of ordinary pets? A Jarvey, for example, a ferret-like beast capable of speech, could wreak havoc in classrooms, blurting insults or revealing confidential information. The Ministry of Magic strictly regulates such creatures, but the porous boundaries of Hogwarts suggest it would not be impossible for one to slip through. The broader issue lies in Hogwarts' laissez-faire approach to safety. The Forbidden Forest teems with centaurs, acromantulas and werewolves, yet students are permitted to wander the grounds with creatures of unknown origin. Hagrid's influence cannot be underestimated here. His affection for monstrous animals blurred the line between harmless pets and dangerous predators. Fluffy, the three-headed dog, was kept as a guard in Philosopher's Stone, but its presence inside the castle represented unimaginable risk. "Just play him a bit of music and he'll go straight off to sleep," Hagrid reassured Harry. But what if a curious student had stumbled upon Fluffy without a harp in hand? The entire premise highlights Hogwarts' troubling disregard for animal-related hazards. Number 14. Exams. Stress on the edge of magical calamity. The image of Hogwarts in the films often feels like a mixture of danger and wonder, where young witches and wizards walk through moving staircases, encounter mysterious creatures, and discover secret rooms. Yet one danger was almost invisible on the screen: the crushing academic pressure that pushed students to the very limits of magical control. While Voldemort and Dementors caught the viewer's eye, the quieter terror of exam season was hidden between the pages of the books. J.K. Rowling gave us a glimpse of it, and in that glimpse lies a story far more unsettling than most realize. For magic is not just a subject on parchment, it is alive, unpredictable, and tied to emotion. And when emotions collide with final exams, the results can be explosive. The quote from Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone already paints the picture. One boy had grown a peacock's tail, and nobody noticed until he had almost left the hall. The casual phrasing makes the scene almost humorous, yet underneath lies the darker truth. Stress was strong enough to twist a child's magic into bizarre transformations of the body. This was not mischief, nor a prank gone wrong. It was raw, uncontrolled energy bursting out during the highest point of pressure. Imagine the humiliation of walking out of an exam with feathers sprouting from your back, or worse, with sparks flying uncontrollably from your wand. For a school built on the idea that magic and identity are entwined, failing an exam could feel like failing at existence itself. Take Neville Longbottom as an example. The films gave us the shy, bumbling boy who slowly found courage, but they left out how often he trembled during examinations. The books describe Neville's nervous energy, his wand slipping, his spells going wrong at the worst possible moment. During practical tests, when nerves ran high, students like Neville stood one mispronounced incantation away from disaster. And disaster, in the magical world, could mean more than embarrassment. Potions bubbling over into acid, transfiguration spells leaving students half animal, half human. This was the reality of academic failure at Hogwarts. The stress of simply showing up to an exam could make a boy like Neville sweat through his robes before he even raised his wand. Hermione Granger, brilliant and relentless, presented the other extreme. She chased perfection with such ferocity that she stretched herself beyond human limits. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, her use of the time turner for double classes was essentially a form of sanctioned academic overwork. By exam season, she was faint, exhausted, and fragile. The text notes, Hermione was barely keeping her eyes open. Here we see how the magical world treated student well-being, not with counseling or rest, but with the expectation that the strongest would endure. While Hermione avoided magical mishaps due to her precision, she showed the more subtle danger, collapse not from spell failure, but from sheer mental strain. Harry himself was not immune. His 5th year brought OWLs, the ordinary wizarding levels, and the memory of those exams reveals a nightmare environment. Students were herded into the Great Hall, watched by stern examiners from the ministry, with anti-cheating spells woven over the parchments. Their quills sprang up and began scratching at the papers, Rowling wrote. The magic made the act feel mechanical, relentless, almost as if failure was programmed into the walls. For Harry, carrying the weight of prophecy and war, the exams became not just tests of knowledge, but reminders of whether he belonged in this world at all. Each mistake carried the silent question: what if the boy who lived cannot even pass his OWLs? The atmosphere itself fed the chaos. Stress in a magical environment did not remain internal. Magic is sensitive, volatile, shaped by emotion. When dozens of young witches and wizards gathered under one enchanted ceiling, their nervous energy buzzed like a storm. Candles shook, quills danced too quickly, and sometimes an entire cauldron erupted into flame because one student's trembling hand slipped. Madame Pomfrey, the tireless healer, could only watch as the injured limped toward the hospital wing. The films showed her dealing with Quidditch accidents or cursed objects, but the books suggest she spent exam season tending to burns, hexes, and spontaneous transfigurations that went wrong in the pressure of the moment. Consider potions, perhaps the cruelest of all subjects during exams. Professor Snape's sharp gaze followed every movement, his comments cutting deeper than any knife. A student's shaking hand might add too much hellebore, causing the cauldron to release toxic smoke. Even Hermione, usually steady, felt her hands tremble when Snape circled. Imagine students like Seamus Finnegan, famous for accidental explosions, being forced to brew under those conditions. Every mistake became not just a deduction of points, but a small catastrophe waiting to happen. The classroom was less an exam hall and more a minefield. Transfiguration brought its own terrors. The art demanded precision at the level of thought itself. Professor McGonagall insisted on complete control. During examinations, students had to turn animals into objects and back again, all under the ticking clock. The wrong concentration could leave a turtle with a teacup's handle instead of a shell, or a rabbit frozen halfway into a slipper. It was the most difficult magic yet, Rowling notes. For young wizards, whose hands already shook with nerves, the pressure was unbearable, and in the magical world, mistakes lingered, sometimes alive, sometimes conscious. The burden of knowing one could accidentally maim a living being during an exam added a weight that few students outside Hogwarts could imagine. Number 15. Trick stairs and deceptive doors. The magical staircases of Hogwarts were only the beginning of the castle's mischievous architecture. While the films briefly hinted at moving steps, they never truly captured the sinister and frustrating character of the doors themselves. In the books, J.K. Rowling describes these doors as living obstacles with personalities of their own, unpredictable in their demands. Some required a polite request to budge, while others vanished before one's eyes. The young reader learns early in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone that there were doors that wouldn't open unless you asked politely or tickled them in exactly the right place. For a first-year student, already burdened with heavy books and an unfamiliar timetable, such trickery could easily become a nightmare. It was one thing to memorize the locations of classrooms and libraries, but quite another to guess which door would play its prank on any given day. Consider the plight of Neville Longbottom, a boy already known for his clumsiness. The films tend to focus on his forgetfulness, his mislaid toad, and his awkward bravery. But in the castle corridors he was prey to the cruel whims of enchanted doors. A moment of hesitation before a stubborn entrance could leave him stranded as the door dissolved into smooth stone. Imagine Neville, late for Professor McGonagall's Transfiguration class, holding his books and sweating in panic, only to discover that the door he needed had disappeared entirely. His reputation as a bumbling student would deepen, yet the blame should not fall solely on him. The castle itself was complicit in creating such humiliating situations. The trickery of Hogwarts doors did not simply test patience, it also posed genuine dangers. The films largely gloss over the possibility of students being trapped overnight in corridors. Yet the books remind us that first years could easily find themselves without access to their common rooms, wandering halls haunted by ghosts. Imagine a terrified 11-year-old locked out because a door refused to respond, shivering under the gaze of the bloody Baron, or subjected to the relentless mischief of Peeves. These were not harmless pranks. They were trials that tested courage in ways the professors rarely acknowledged. Peeves himself, often cut from the cinematic adaptation, thrived on these moments. His chaos was magnified by the castle's own unhelpful behavior. A student begging a door to open in vain would become his favorite victim. Peeves would hurl chalk, drop water balloons, or mock the unfortunate child until tears welled in their eyes. Without the compassion of a passing prefect, the victim might endure long minutes of ridicule, trapped in a game where even the walls seemed to take sides against them. Such moments were a rite of passage unrecorded in the films, but they revealed the harsher reality of Hogwarts life. Hermione Granger, brilliant and meticulous, was one of the few who adapted quickly. Where others panicked, she learned the patterns of certain doors and developed strategies for navigating the castle. Her logical mind turned trickery into puzzles, and she treated them with the same intensity she brought to her studies. Yet even she was not immune to frustration. One can imagine her late at night, clutching a stack of library books, tapping a door in irritation until the rhythm unlocked it. Without her persistence, many first years might have given up altogether. The doors did not discriminate between the gifted and the clumsy. Their sole purpose seemed to be reminding students that the castle was alive, unpredictable, and not easily tamed. Another forgotten detail lies in the riddling doors, particularly those that demanded cleverness to pass. The most famous of these was the entrance to Ravenclaw Tower, which required students to answer riddles. Which came first, the phoenix or the flame? The bronze knocker once asked. Such obstacles, though intellectually stimulating, became terrifying under pressure. A tired student, desperate to rest, could find themselves humiliated in front of their peers if they failed to answer. While the films never portray these moments, the books subtly emphasized that wit was as necessary as bravery in the castle. Doors that mocked ignorance left students feeling exposed, their minds as tested as their magic. The cruelty of these obstacles was compounded by the fact that Hogwarts itself offered little guidance. Filch, the caretaker, had no patience for lost or stranded children. Prefects, though occasionally helpful, were often too busy with their own duties. In truth, the enchanted doors acted as secret gatekeepers, reinforcing the castle's reputation as a place of constant trial. Harry Potter himself encountered countless challenges, yet the films rarely acknowledge how often the castle's own magic worked against him. A door that refused to open, or a staircase that shifted beneath his feet, could delay him at crucial moments. In a world where seconds mattered, such as when chasing an intruder or fleeing danger, this magical trickery added peril. The Gryffindor common room door also illustrates this theme. Protected by the fat lady's portrait, it demanded not only a password, but often patience with the painting's moods. There were nights when she refused entry, insisting on proper behavior or gossiping at length before swinging open. The door was not merely a barrier, it was a personality that could punish students for being forgetful or late. The films simplified this to a few light-hearted scenes, but in reality it meant constant anxiety for those prone to mistakes. Harry and his friends frequently found themselves locked out, stranded in corridors, a detail that added to the daily tension of school life. For Muggle-born students, the living doors and vanishing staircases must have been particularly alarming. Dean Thomas or Hermione, raised in ordinary households, had no preparation for an environment where even architecture had moods. A door refusing to open unless tickled in the right place could feel more like a curse than a joke. To them, Hogwarts was both a sanctuary and a maze, its enchantments revealing just how alien and demanding this world truly was. The castle itself seemed to whisper, "You are not in your world anymore." Such architecture also held darker implications. During moments of real danger, such as the Battle of Hogwarts, students and staff relied on the castle for protection. But what if a vanishing door or a disappearing staircase blocked an escape route? The danger was not theoretical. Imagine students fleeing Death Eaters only to slam against a stone wall where a doorway had once been. The very tricks that amused the founders could easily have trapped the vulnerable. While Rowling never lingers on this possibility, it underscores how treacherous the castle could be when lives were at stake. Ron Weasley's perspective offers another angle. Raised in a wizarding household, he might have found the trick doors more irritating than terrifying. Yet even Ron, with his casual acceptance of magic, often struggled with the unpredictability of Hogwarts. His exasperation in the face of magical absurdity provides humor, but beneath it lies the reality that no amount of upbringing could prepare a child for an institution designed to confound. His complaints remind us that the castle was a challenge not just for outsiders, but for all. One cannot ignore the role of tradition in maintaining these enchanted barriers. The founders of Hogwarts created a school that trained not only magical ability but resilience. The vanishing doors and deceptive staircases forced children to adapt, to think on their feet, and to endure humiliation. It was a form of pedagogy that valued survival as much as spellwork. In this sense, the architecture itself was a teacher, cruel but effective. Yet for the students caught in the moment, it was difficult to see wisdom in being left cold and frightened outside a locked door. Draco Malfoy, with his arrogance, might have seen these obstacles differently. For him, every disappearing door was an opportunity to sneer at less fortunate classmates. He too would have faced frustrations, but his pride would never allow him to admit it. Instead, he used the trickery of the castle to assert dominance, mocking those who failed where he succeeded. In this way, the doors became tools of social hierarchy, reinforcing divisions between the confident and the insecure. The films rarely explore this aspect, but it is an undeniable undercurrent in the books. The truth is that Hogwarts itself was as much a character as Harry, Hermione, or Ron. Its doors, its staircases, and its shifting corridors created an environment that was alive, watchful, and often cruel. The castle trained its students not only in charms and potions, but in patience, wit, and resilience against forces beyond their control. Yet this training came at a cost. The doors that refused to open without courtesy, that demanded riddles at midnight, or that vanished altogether, were not harmless quirks. They were constant reminders that even in a place of supposed safety, danger lurked in the very walls. Ultimately, what the films did not show is that Hogwarts itself could be an adversary. While Harry battled dark wizards, dragons, and dementors, his daily existence was also a struggle against enchanted doors and deceptive staircases. For the young and unprepared, this was as daunting as any duel. The students of Hogwarts learned early that magic was not a gentle gift. It was a force that tested them relentlessly, even in the simple act of finding their way to class. And though the films offered glimpses of wonder, they never truly captured the unsettling truth that the castle was both guardian and tormentor, shaping every child through challenges hidden in its very stones. Number 16, the kitchen and elf magic. Hidden beneath the marble floors of the Great Hall lies one of the most overlooked yet crucial chambers of Hogwarts, the vast kitchen where dozens of house elves labor endlessly to sustain the castle. It is a space rarely mentioned, almost never seen in the films, yet it plays a pivotal role in the daily survival of every witch and wizard who calls the school home. The room is reached through a door concealed behind a still life of fruit, and only those who know the secret may enter. To the untrained eye, this underground chamber might seem like a place of warmth and abundance, a sanctuary of bubbling cauldrons and roasted meats. But behind the cheerful facade of steaming dishes lies a layer of danger the films never dared to show. The unique and unpredictable magic of the house elves themselves. The elves who toil there are bound neither by the rules of wands nor by the restrictions of human magic. J.K. Rowling herself hints at this difference when she describes in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, house elf magic was different to wizard magic, and nobody knew exactly how powerful it was. This line, often overlooked, carries immense weight. It suggests that the elves' abilities might not simply be equal to wizards, but could surpass them in areas that humans cannot comprehend. Imagine then what might happen if a reckless student, emboldened by curiosity or hunger, stumbled uninvited into the kitchen. In a school where rules are bent daily by daring Gryffindors and cunning Slytherins, such a possibility is not as remote as one might think. The kitchen is not guarded by dragons or enchanted locks. Its protection lies in secrecy and in the will of those who inhabit it. To enter without invitation would mean trespassing upon the elves' sacred workspace. Consider Winky, the disgraced elf once bound to the Crouch family, or Creature, whose loyalty to the Black family bordered on obsession. Their actions in the series remind us that elves are far from harmless. They can punish, restrain, and even resist the wishes of wizards when their sense of duty or justice demands it. Within the kitchen, the elves are not mere servants, but guardians of the very sustenance that keeps Hogwarts alive. It is worth recalling that Dobby, a free elf, could perform feats of magic that even powerful wizards struggled to counter. He disarmed Lucius Malfoy without a wand. He could apparate inside Hogwarts grounds, a place where Dumbledore himself admitted no wizard could. This tells us something about the kitchen and those who dwell there. If Dobby alone could bend the laws of magic so thoroughly, what of the dozens of elves labouring together in unison below the Great Hall? Their collective power, though never depicted in the films, would be formidable. The implication is chilling. The very heartbeat of Hogwarts, the meals that sustain its students, rests in the hands of beings whose strength surpasses the staff's ability to control. The films present the Great Hall as a place of feasting and joy. Platters appear magically filled, goblets overflow with pumpkin juice, and dishes vanish only to be replaced by fresh ones. The audience is never told how this miracle occurs. In truth, it is the house elves below, their magic channeling food upward, sustaining hundreds every single day. One must pause to consider the delicate balance of trust involved. For every banquet, every Christmas feast, every hurried breakfast before class, the students unknowingly rely on elves whose culture, desires, and inner lives are rarely understood. Should resentment brew among them, the consequences would be more terrifying than an empty table. Magic laced with their displeasure could easily turn a meal into a weapon. An example sits quietly in the pages of Goblet of Fire when Harry, Ron, and Hermione first visit the kitchen. They find it bustling with activity, dozens of elves eager to serve, pressing food upon the trio, yet the atmosphere carries an unspoken warning. Hermione, moved by the elves' condition, begins her campaign for their rights, launching SPTWS. Her alarm was not misplaced. To her, the sight of creatures bound to labor without freedom underscored the injustice of their existence. But what the films did not convey is the underlying danger. Creatures, capable of such potent magic, kept satisfied only by traditions of servitude, might one day rebel. What then would become of the castle if those in charge of feeding it turned their gifts toward harm? One can imagine a darker scenario. Suppose a group of mischievous students like Fred and George Weasley, in their younger years, attempted to sneak into the kitchens for a late-night feast. Their usual pranks carried little consequence beyond detentions and howlers, but here, in the heart of elf territory, their antics could spark outrage. The elves, perceiving intrusion, might respond with magic far beyond the boys' capacity to endure. A wave of elf enchantment could disarm them, bind them, or worse. The Weasley twins, often masters of chaos, would find themselves helpless against the stern justice of those who rule beneath the hall. Another glimpse of this hidden danger comes from Creature's stubborn resistance in Order of the Phoenix. He disobeyed direct orders, manipulated events, and indirectly contributed to Sirius Black's death. This is no minor matter. If one elf could shift the outcome of the war by his choices, what collective impact could an entire kitchen's worth of elves wield? Their loyalty is powerful, yes, but their autonomy, when pushed, is equally so. Students wandering into their domain risk encountering not just discipline, but the unpredictable force of a magic untethered to wands or spells taught in class. Hogwarts itself is layered with hazards, moving staircases, poltergeists, shifting rooms, but none are as underestimated as the hidden kitchen, for while a staircase may trap or trick a student, it does not wield judgment. Elves do. The power of intention matters greatly in their magic. If they believe someone disrupts order, their response may be swift and merciless. A well-placed hex from an elf could erase hours of a student's memory, immobilize their body, or transport them to some remote corner of the castle. The films spare viewers from considering such fates, but the books hint at this possibility with every reference to elf independence. Even the question of poison, subtle, deadly, becomes sharper when one recalls that elves prepare every meal. In Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore drinks the cursed potion in the cave, warning Harry that he must ensure he drinks it all, no matter the pain. Imagine if the same principle applied to food at Hogwarts. A single elf, disillusioned, might lace a dish with a hex invisible to human detection. Wizards, reliant on wands and spells, would be powerless to prevent it. Only trust keeps such horrors at bay, trust that the elves remain devoted to the castle's prosperity. The safety of every feast relies not on magical wards but on the continued goodwill of beings often overlooked. This danger is heightened by the sheer invisibility of the elves' presence. Students rarely see them. Most assume food simply appears, born of enchantment. Only a handful, like Harry and his closest friends, know the truth. This ignorance breeds vulnerability. To underestimate the elves is to underestimate a force that thrives in shadows. Their power is quiet but immense, their influence subtle but total. They need no wands, no incantation spoken aloud. Their will is enough. Dobby demonstrated it when he sealed Platform 9 3/4, nearly preventing Harry and Ron from returning to school. If one elf could block an ancient magical passage, what might many elves achieve together beneath the Great Hall? The Great Hall itself becomes a symbol of this delicate balance. Above, the enchanted ceiling reflects the sky, the candles float serenely, and laughter rings out at the long tables. Below, in contrast, lies a furnace of activity, clattering pots, and magical energy woven by unseen hands. It is a duality rarely explored. The joy above is only possible because of the tireless and potentially volatile labor below. The students feast in blissful ignorance, but the reader who looks closely realizes that the very foundation of their comfort rests upon a razor's edge of trust between species. Consider the loyalty elves feel toward individuals they respect. Dobby adored Harry, serving him even in death with fierce devotion, yet contrast that with Creature's hatred of Sirius, whom he despised. One elf helped save lives, the other hastened a tragedy. The kitchen, then, is a crucible where such emotions brew collectively. If they favor the school, Hogwarts thrives. If bitterness takes root, Hogwarts withers. The films stripped away this complexity, reducing elves to background figures or omitting them entirely. But the books whisper of a deeper truth. Elves hold the balance of power in ways students and staff scarcely acknowledge. In a world where Voldemort's return, Death Eaters, and dark artifacts dominate the narrative, it is easy to overlook the subtler dangers. Yet those dangers often lurk in plain sight, disguised as ordinary or mundane. The Hogwarts kitchen is one such place. its apparent safety hides the reality that the castle's lifeline, the food, the warmth, the sense of home, depends entirely upon the continued goodwill of creatures whose magic surpasses human comprehension. Rowling leaves us with just enough hints to imagine the rest. And when one remembers the quote from Chamber of Secrets, the warning resonates. House elf magic was different to wizard magic, and nobody knew exactly how powerful it was. Number 17, Potions Class, an explosion waiting to happen. In the shadowy underbelly of Hogwarts, far removed from the bright windows of the Great Hall and the laughter in the courtyards, a different kind of danger simmered quietly every day. The dungeon classrooms where Severus Snape held his lessons were more than just places of instruction. They were chambers of trial, where fire and fumes could at any moment turn a simple mistake into catastrophe. Potions was not simply about measuring and stirring. It was about precision under pressure, about survival when the smallest hesitation might mean an eruption of smoke, flame, or worse. J.K. Rowling's books give us glimpses of these moments, yet the films rarely linger on the true volatility of those hours underground, where the heat of a cauldron became as menacing as a dragon's breath. It was Neville Longbottom, poor and perpetually nervous Neville, who embodied this peril more than anyone else. His trembling hands and constant second-guessing became almost a prophecy of disaster the moment he stepped into Snape's classroom. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Rowling wrote, "One of Neville's cauldrons had just emitted a puff of foul-smelling smoke and was now pouring a fountain of greenish solution which instantly melted his shoes." What begins as a comic image for the reader is in reality a portrait of physical danger. Acid strong enough to eat through leather in seconds is hardly a laughing matter. That Neville walked away with little more than embarrassment was luck. The same misstep could have left another student scarred for life. These accidents, though often treated with humour in the narrative, form a constant drumbeat of risk in the world of Hogwarts. Madame Pomfrey, the tireless healer of the castle, became as much a participant in potions lessons as Snape himself. She could predict the flow of injured students who staggered up from the dungeons after a class gone wrong. Burned hands, blistered faces, singed hair, and accidental poisonings filled her ward. In a school where Quidditch injuries drew more attention, the quiet stream of potion-related mishaps was a danger the films never fully dared to portray. The squeal of a cauldron tipping, the hiss of liquid against stone, and the sickly smell of a ruined draught were warning bells that only the students truly understood. The real peril lay not just in the mistakes of novices, but in the very nature of the ingredients themselves. Boomslang skin, powdered root of asphodel, bezoars and moonstone, each was potent, unstable, and in the wrong hands lethal. Unlike the steady predictability of charms or the structured chants of incantations, potions demanded intuition and precision beyond the reach of most children. A wand wave could be corrected mid-motion, but a drop too much of wormwood could curdle a mixture into poison. Rowling shows us in the very first book that Harry's curiosity about potions began with Snape's question about bezoars, stones from a goat's stomach that could save a life. Yet to understand antidotes meant acknowledging that the danger of poison was always present, waiting in the bubbling liquid before them. Consider Amatentia, the most powerful love potion in existence. Its pearly sheen and spiraling fumes might appear beautiful, but it was as dangerous as any curse. Slughorn, who introduced it in his class, admitted openly that its effects were impossible to counteract entirely. A student who mishandled it, who spilled a drop too much into another cauldron, could unleash an obsession that bordered on madness. The films made much of Ron Weasley's accidental intoxication with Romilda Vane's chocolates, yet they softened the terror. To be under the thrall of a potion that rewired one's desires was not comic at all. It was a theft of will, a violation of choice. To brew such a substance beside 13-year-olds with shaky hands was to tempt disaster. And then there was Felix Felicis, the liquid luck that turned chance itself into a weapon. Harry's use of it to coax Professor Slughorn's memory was a moment of triumph, but imagine the chaos if Neville or Seamus had spilled a cauldron of it across the classroom floor. Luck, indiscriminate and unpredictable, could have flooded the school with strange twists of fate, granting fortune to some and disaster to others in the collision of enchanted events. Snape's classroom was not simply a place of learning, it was a vault of unstable possibilities, each potion a potential force capable of shifting destinies in ways no child could truly comprehend. Rowling herself hints at the unpredictability when Seamus Finnegan's reputation for accidental explosions becomes a running thread. Though more often associated with charms, his misadventures in potions carried the same weight of danger. A single bang in a dungeon full of combustible brews could chain into calamity. Fire mixed with powdered roots or spilled draught of living death could create a nightmare far beyond the confines of one misbehaving cauldron. The castle's stone walls may have contained the flames, but no enchantment could undo the terror of being trapped amid choking fumes and boiling acid. Snape's own teaching style compounded the peril. He was not patient nor forgiving. His sharp tongue and cutting remarks magnified the tension in the room, ensuring that students like Neville or even Ron made more mistakes than they might otherwise. Fear clouded judgment, and trembling hands spilled more than steady ones. In the world of potion-making, fear itself became an ingredient, one that curdled every mixture. The films made Snape's sarcasm iconic, but they rarely showed how his cruelty contributed to the very explosions and mishaps that filled Madame Pomfrey's ward. The dungeon was not only a crucible for brews, it was a crucible for young souls tested by humiliation and dread. Take, for instance, the lessons on Polyjuice Potion. In the Chamber of Secrets, Hermione Granger's brilliance nearly cost her dearly when she mistook a cat's hair for human. The transformation was horrific, leaving her partially transfigured and suffering for weeks. What is left understated is the fragility of the process itself. If Hermione, the most meticulous student of her age, could falter so badly, what chance did the rest of the class have against brews of equal complexity? A single incorrect addition could lead to transformations far worse than feline ears and a tail. To sit side by side with such mixtures in adolescence was to dance constantly at the edge of catastrophe. Even the draught of living death, introduced in Half-Blood Prince, was a recipe that flirted with darkness. One drop too strong and a student could fall into a slumber that no wizard could undo. Harry's success in brewing it under Snape's borrowed instructions was remarkable, but behind that victory was a silent truth. The margin for error was fatal. Students were not simply learning recipes, they were playing with the boundary between life and death itself. The films presented this as a moment of triumph, yet they skipped over the possibility that in another cauldron, one stirred by a less careful hand, someone might not have awakened. The sheer variety of potions, from antidotes to poisons, meant that the classroom was a laboratory of extremes. Students brewed Skelegro, the agonizing remedy for lost bones, and dreamless sleep, a draught that could silence a mind. They mixed ingredients that could mend, and others that could maim, sometimes without understanding the difference. To sit among vials of venom and jars of powdered claws was to be surrounded by quiet weapons, any of which could slip into the wrong mixture with devastating results. The tension of each lesson was not only about grades, but about survival. Fred and George Weasley, mischief makers extraordinaire, made light of potions by inventing their own trick sweets and tonics. Yet behind their humour was a chilling reminder that even playful experimentation with potion craft could backfire. Their canary creams and puking pastilles were relatively benign, but what if a young prankster stumbled into something more toxic? Their inventions were proof that potions could alter the body in alarming ways. In the safety of a joke shop, the results were manageable. In a dungeon full of half-trained teenagers, the same impulse could turn to tragedy. The fact that potions was compulsory for the first 5 years of schooling only heightened the danger. Every witch and wizard, regardless of talent, was thrust into this volatile environment. The gifted might thrive, but the clumsy were doomed to constant peril. Unlike Quidditch, where only the daring volunteered, potions claimed every child, binding them to the bubbling risks of cauldrons they did not want to touch. It was a curriculum that demanded participation in danger, whether one was prepared or not. To ignore these daily hazards is to overlook one of the most treacherous realities of Hogwarts life. The castle itself may have harbored shifting staircases, a forbidden forest, and a chamber of secrets, but the steady pulse of danger beat strongest in the dungeons. Every lesson was an experiment, every cauldron a possible weapon. Students emerged with more than knowledge. They carried scars, fears, and in rare cases, triumphs earned at the edge of disaster. The films showed us Harry dueling Voldemort and flying on broomsticks, but they left unspoken the truth that perhaps the greatest threat to young wizards came not from dark lords or monsters, but from the boiling depths of their own cauldrons. Number 18, Ancient Curses of the Castle. Hogwarts was never simply a school. It was a living, breathing fortress of magic, pulsing with enchantments so old that even Albus Dumbledore himself admitted that much of the castle's power could not be fully explained. Generations of witches and wizards passed through its halls, yet few paused to consider that the very walls surrounding them held secrets more perilous than a misfired jinx in defense against the dark arts. The films presented Hogwarts as whimsical and mysterious, yes, but also as largely safe so long as the rules were followed. The truth in the book suggests otherwise. Deep within its stones linger curses set centuries earlier, charms designed to defend, but which sometimes acted unpredictably, endangering the very students they were meant to protect. One cannot forget the strange, shifting staircases, which seem like a harmless quirk in the films. But in the texts, there are suggestions that this shifting is not entirely benign. It is not merely an architectural oddity, but a magical defense created by the founders themselves to prevent invaders from mapping the castle. More than once, Harry and his friends were nearly trapped or dangerously delayed by the whims of the stairs. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Rowling writes, "There were 142 staircases at Hogwarts, wide, sweeping ones, narrow, rickety ones, some that led somewhere different on a Friday." That line hints at a darker truth. If staircases can alter their destination by will, they can strand an unsuspecting child in a tower, or worse, deposit them in a forbidden corridor, warded with protective curses. Consider the third-floor corridor in Harry's first year, where Fluffy guarded the trapdoor to the Sorcerer's Stone. Dumbledore's warning was simple. Anyone who does not wish to die a very painful death would do well to stay away. That alone shows that corridors can conceal far more than stone and mortar. The enchantments designed to seal off such corridors are not gentle warnings, they are infused with aggression. A misstep, a wrong turn, could easily provoke them. Even Hermione admitted more than once that the castle sometimes seemed to have a mind of its own. That mind, old and unfathomable, was not always merciful. The most unsettling evidence lies in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, where Rowling notes, "Some of the enchantments placed on the castle were so old, even the teachers did not know what would happen if they were broken." This is not idle storytelling. It means that no one, not even professors like McGonagall, who had walked those corridors for decades, could predict the consequences of stumbling upon a forgotten ward. Ancient protective curses do not differentiate between foe and student. If triggered, they act with all the ferocity of their original purpose. Imagine a young first year curious enough to push against a sealed wall, only to be flung across the grounds, bruised and bewildered, with no idea what they awakened. There is an overlooked example in Chamber of Secrets. When Filch's cat, Mrs. Norris, was found petrified, the immediate suspicion was of some dark curse unleashed in the castle. But deeper than the basilisk, there was a whisper in the narrative that the walls themselves carried strange echoes of old spells. Harry, wandering alone after hearing the eerie voice in the pipes, described feeling as if the walls themselves were listening. Those passages suggest a castle not merely housing the students but actively watching them. If so, then those listening walls might also respond to ancient triggers buried long before the founder's time. Slytherin's hand is the most obvious in these dangerous remnants. Salazar Slytherin built his chamber beneath the castle, and he was not a man to shy away from deadly enchantments. If he left a basilisk slumbering under the floors for centuries, what else did he embed into the walls? Curses meant to repel unworthy intruders could easily lie dormant in lesser-known wings of the school. Centuries later, when children from Muggle families strolled the corridors he once despised, those curses might still wake, sensing bloodlines they were not designed to protect. Though the films portray the chamber as a singular secret, the books leave the chilling possibility that other chambers exist, each carrying enchantments more volatile than the last. Helga Hufflepuff, known for her kindness, also imbued her work with protective magic, though her spells were not always safe. In Goblet of Fire, the Triwizard Tournament revealed how even seemingly benevolent enchantments could turn cruel under pressure. The enchanted maze surrounding the Triwizard Cup was built within the grounds themselves. The hedges were alive, twisting and growing at will, Rowling wrote. Such sentient magic was not summoned from thin air, it echoed the castle's deeper nature. If the grounds themselves could be enchanted into a living trap, then the castle halls, saturated with spells over 1,000 years, could be equally dangerous when disturbed. Another unsettling hint lies in the way the castle resists destruction. During the Battle of Hogwarts, protective wards shielded the school so fiercely that even Voldemort's forces struggled to breach them. These defences, ancient and impersonal, lashed out at enemies without distinction. Yet who could say whether a student wandering at the wrong time in the wrong place might accidentally activate those same violent wards? The magic was designed to defend, not to discern. That distinction is vital. Defense does not always spare the innocent. Rowling also drops small, chilling details about vanishing steps. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry recalls that certain staircases contained trick steps. Step into one carelessly and your leg would sink, trapping you helplessly until another student pulled you free. What purpose could such traps serve but to hinder an intruder? Yet they remain active, catching not enemies, but children. If such minor tricks persist unchecked, what of larger curses buried deeper in the castle? How many enchanted doorways conceal not classrooms, but sudden dislocation spells, flinging the trespasser far beyond safety? The portraits, too, may be linked to these lingering enchantments. While amusing on the surface, they are part of the castle's surveillance system, and their magic is interwoven with the walls themselves. Nearly Headless Nick once remarked that the castle is full of surprises even for us. Ghosts who glide through walls with ease still speak of encountering rooms that resist them or corridors that shift unexpectedly. If even the dead cannot pass freely, then something more sinister is at work. These are not mere quirks of architecture, they are echoes of ancient spells that continue to function with unpredictable intent. Another example can be drawn from the Room of Requirement. Its very existence is proof that Hogwarts harbours living, shifting magic beyond the control of any headmaster. The room manifests based on need, but its refusal to appear at times of great necessity shows it is not merely responsive, it is selective, even capricious. In Half-Blood Prince, when Draco used it to hide his vanishing cabinet, the room aided him, a student plotting the castle's downfall. What if other forgotten rooms exist, each bound by rules no living wizard recalls, ready to reveal themselves at the wrong moment? Dumbledore himself, with all his wisdom, admitted ignorance. In Order of the Phoenix, he tells Harry, "Even I do not pretend to know all the secrets of this castle." That statement is as chilling as it is revealing. If the greatest wizard of his time could not claim mastery over the building, then no student was ever truly safe. Each darkened corridor, each forgotten door, each whispering wall might conceal enchantments older than the Ministry of Magic itself. These spells were not placed with children in mind. They were cast to guard secrets, to resist invasion, to punish trespassers. The notion that Hogwarts is alive is not metaphorical. In Deathly Hallows, when Voldemort's army attacked, the statues and suits of armor sprang to life at McGonagall's command. That power was not newly created, it was always there, latent in the castle. If such slumbering armies can awaken, what else might stir unbidden? Perhaps entire corridors could collapse or reshape themselves, entombing anyone inside. Perhaps staircases could reverse into abysses. The castle is a guardian, yes, but guardians are not always gentle. They act according to their design, not according to innocence or guilt. For the students who adored Hogwarts as home, these truths are unsettling. The films painted the school as dangerous only when villains invaded. The reality is harsher. Danger lies in the very stones born from spells cast 1,000 years ago. Every torchlit hallway may carry unseen risks. Every enchanted wall may conceal a will of its own. Harry's survival was not only a triumph over Voldemort, but also a quiet triumph over the unpredictability of Hogwarts itself. The boy who lived did so not just in defiance of Death Eaters and Dark Lords, but also in defiance of a castle whose magic could have turned on him at any moment, without warning, without mercy. Number 19. Quidditch, a sport on the verge of death. Of all the wonders of the magical world, few are as breathtaking and at the same time as perilous as the sport of Quidditch. To the casual observer who has only seen brief flashes of broomsticks soaring across the Quidditch pitch in the films, it might appear as a fantastical game of speed and spectacle. Yet the reality, as described in J.K. Rowling's books, paints a picture far more terrifying. Young students, some as young as 11, were routinely launched into the air on broomsticks, racing at speeds that could easily surpass 100 kilometers per hour. They twisted, collided, plummeted, and fought against enchanted iron balls designed to knock them from the sky. In any other setting, such activity would be banned immediately as too dangerous. Hogwarts, however, it was considered a school sport, complete with roaring crowds and house pride on the line. The books make no attempt to hide the danger. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Rowling describes Harry's first game with visceral clarity. Harry was speeding toward the ground when the ball suddenly opened. He caught it in his hand, and the next moment he was lying flat on the ground, the snitch held tightly in his hand. The sheer idea that an 11-year-old could plummet dozens of meters from the sky and survive only because he managed to catch a tiny golden ball borders on the absurd. Yet this was not only permitted, but celebrated. The audience cheered, the team lifted him up as a hero, and no one seemed to question the sheer recklessness of the act. In that moment, Harry could have died, and yet, to the wizarding world, he was simply playing the national sport. Consider, too, the brutal addition of bludgers, heavy, enchanted balls charmed to hurl themselves at players with the singular purpose of knocking them from their brooms. Their only counterbalance came from the beaters, who wielded bats to deflect them. This was not a gentle parlour game. It was a constant struggle against projectiles intent on inflicting serious bodily harm. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, the danger became even more explicit when Dobby tampered with the bludger. Rowling writes, "It whizzed around, aiming directly for Harry, smashing into him again and again. The relentless bludger ultimately shattered his arm. The audience may have gasped, and Madame Pomfrey may have been furious afterward, but the match continued until Harry caught the snitch, and his victory was celebrated even as his bones were magically removed by the inept Gilderoy Lockhart. The role of Madame Pomfrey in these incidents cannot be understated. She may be remembered as the stern but kindly matron of the hospital wing, yet she carried the burden of tending to countless injuries caused by Quidditch. A twisted ankle here, a broken arm there, and sometimes far worse. The sheer regularity of these injuries suggests that Hogwarts, for all its majesty, fostered an atmosphere where student safety was secondary to tradition and entertainment. Madame Pomfrey herself remarked more than once that she had better things to do than mend the foolish injuries of Quidditch players. Still, the games went on. House rivalry was considered more important than the very real prospect of students tumbling lifelessly to the ground. Nor was Harry the only casualty. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, a game played during a vicious storm nearly killed him. Rowling describes how Harry fought to stay on his broom, blinded by rain, lightning flashing around him, while Dementors swept onto the field. Harry's vision went white. He could not see. He felt himself spinning out of control. Then he felt his broom give a lurch beneath him. He was falling, arms flailing. He plummeted from his Nimbus 2000, saved only from death by Dumbledore's intervention, who conjured a spell to break his fall. Yet even then, the broom was destroyed. A child almost died because a school thought it appropriate to allow play in the middle of a storm with soul-sucking creatures roaming nearby. What is striking is how normalized this danger was in the wizarding world. Oliver Wood, the passionate Gryffindor captain, cared deeply for victory and strategy, often emphasizing tactics over safety. His obsession with training Harry, pushing him into games where the stakes were literally life and death, is telling. To Wood, Quidditch was everything, and Harry was the key to winning the cup. The thrill of victory overshadowed the potential horror of watching a first-year student plummet to his death. The culture surrounding Quidditch transformed these dangers into expected hazards, much like injuries in a high-contact sport, only magnified tenfold by the magical setting. The broomsticks themselves were dangerous tools. Flying was a skill students barely began to master in their first year, yet within weeks Harry was thrust into a competitive match. Even the most skilled broom, such as the Nimbus 2000 or later the Firebolt, required immense control to handle at high speeds. One small error, one moment of distraction, and the rider would be spiraling toward the earth. The very design of the sport made accidents inevitable. Indeed, in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Victor Krum, the Bulgarian seeker, demonstrated how even professionals were not immune to catastrophe. In the Quidditch World Cup final, Crum's pursuit of the snitch left him bloodied, his face injured by bludgers, yet he caught it anyway, sealing his team's loss. If world-class players faced such risks, what chance did mere students have? The films, while spectacular, softened much of this danger. The sweeping camera angles and thrilling music emphasized excitement over terror. What they did not fully capture was the ever-present dread of falling. Rowling's text makes it clear every match carried the possibility of death or crippling injury. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Ron Weasley, newly appointed keeper, vomited before games out of sheer nerves. The terror was not only about performance but about survival. A ball hurled at the head, a mid-air collision, or a broomstick spiraling out of control. These were realities that each player faced every time they mounted their broom. The culture of Hogwarts, however, glorified Quidditch to such an extent that these dangers became invisible. The stands were always full, students cheered with banners and painted faces, professors attended with barely concealed excitement. Even McGonagall, the strict disciplinarian, bent rules for the sake of Quidditch, famously allowing Harry onto the team after his first flying lesson, despite the game being restricted to older students. The pride of the house outweighed the risks, a mentality that reflects how tradition often blinds institutions to glaring dangers. Quidditch was not merely a sport, it was a symbol of identity, and for that danger was tolerated, even celebrated. One cannot forget Fred and George Weasley, who, as beaters, wielded bats with reckless joy. Their job was literally to hit away flying iron balls, sometimes aiming them at opponents to gain advantage. That two teenagers were allowed to weaponize enchanted projectiles in an official school sport is astonishing when examined critically. Their skill saved Gryffindor players countless times, but it also underscored the violence inherent in the game. For Fred and George, it was exhilarating. For those on the receiving end, it could mean a broken rib or a shattered skull. The weather alone was enough to make Quidditch a hazard. Matches were rarely cancelled, even in howling wind, snow, or lightning. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry's game in the storm was not an exception, but an expectation. Students played in freezing rain while visibility was near zero, chasing golden specks across a sky that threatened to kill them with every gust. What responsible institution would force children into the air under such conditions? Yet Hogwarts thrived on it, and the audience roared with excitement from beneath their cloaks and umbrellas. The danger extended beyond the pitch. Rivalries often boiled over into sabotage. In Chamber of Secrets, Draco Malfoy's inclusion on the Slytherin team, purchased with Nimbus 2001s, brought bitter tensions. Quidditch was not only dangerous physically, but emotionally, a battlefield where grudges turned into aggression. Foul play was rampant, and referees like Madame Hooch struggled to maintain control. Rules existed, but their enforcement was lax, and players often exploited loopholes in the chaos of the game. The result was a sport where violence was as natural as flight. Even when players did not die, the injuries inflicted could be gruesome. Harry himself experienced broken bones, lost consciousness, and endured the agony of Skelegro when Lockhart removed the bones from his arm. Neville Longbottom, though not a Quidditch player, once broke his wrist in flying class, a reminder that even the training ground could maim. The normalization of such accidents reflects how deep the culture of risk ran in wizarding society. What Muggles would consider a catastrophe was often shrugged off as part of life. The heart of the matter lies in perspective. To wizards, Quidditch was their beloved sport, akin to football or rugby in the Muggle world, albeit magnified by magic and far deadlier. To outsiders, it would appear utterly reckless. The danger was written into its very rules. Players were expected to chase a tiny, nearly impossible-to-see ball while avoiding collisions and attacks from both enchanted projectiles and other players. The winner was the one who risked their body most completely in pursuit of glory. Harry as Seeker embodied this danger, soaring higher and falling harder than anyone else, and every victory he achieved carried with it the shadow of what could have gone wrong. Perhaps the greatest irony is that this was considered entertainment for children. 11-year-olds were trained to risk their lives for house points, watched by peers and professors alike. The films gave us glimpses of its thrill, but they could never fully capture the sheer peril Harry faced every time he mounted his broom. Quidditch, far from being a charming, magical pastime, was a sport balanced precariously on the edge of death, and every match was a reminder of how easily the magical world ignored danger when cloaked in tradition and pride. Number 20, enchantments in the walls themselves. Hogwarts is often described as a sanctuary for young witches and wizards, a place of wonder, discovery, and learning. Yet hidden within its walls lies a danger that is rarely acknowledged, one far subtler than a duel with a Death Eater or a misfired spell in potions class. The castle itself moves, breathes, and shifts as though alive. Its staircases twist into new directions, its corridors stretch into dead ends, and its walls seem to pulse with a secret rhythm that only they understand. Коридоры постоянно меняли форму и направление, так что даже старшекурсники иногда терялись в знакомых местах. Rowling wrote in Philosopher's Stone, capturing the first hint that the building itself is no passive backdrop. What she leaves unsaid, however, is that these shifts can become more than inconvenient. They can turn into trials of survival. One must imagine what it means to be 11 years old, newly removed from the comfort of home, navigating endless stone passageways that disobey logic. Even Harry, who quickly adapted to the castle's eccentricities, found himself often bewildered by corridors that had changed overnight. The Marauder's map later revealed much, but not even its magical ink could fully tame the labyrinthine nature of Hogwarts. Ron once admitted that the shifting architecture made him uneasy, particularly when staircases suddenly sealed behind him, leaving no clear way back. The films show Hogwarts as mysterious but always manageable. In reality, the castle's transformations could border on menacing, especially when experienced alone in the dark. Consider the fact that the walls themselves sometimes pushed students into unexpected directions. There is a description in Chamber of Secrets where Harry and Ron, racing to avoid Filch, find themselves squeezed by the moving walls into an unfamiliar passageway that seemed to appear only in that instant. Rowling glosses over the more sinister implications of such behavior, but it is worth dwelling on them. What if the castle trapped a student not out of mischief but indifference? Hogwarts has no conscience. It reacts as it pleases. A child could vanish into one of its countless folds, and the walls would remain silent. The castle's long history deepens this unease. It was constructed by 4 founders with vastly different views of power and morality. Salazar Slytherin in particular believed in trials and obstacles, favoring tests that proved worthiness through danger. It is not unreasonable to think that parts of the shifting corridors bear his imprint, designed to filter strength from weakness. The founders built enchantments into the very mortar, and those enchantments linger. The moving staircases are charming on the surface, yet they are also traps, sometimes carrying a student to an entirely different floor without warning. Hermione once remarked in frustration that even revising her study schedule was impossible because the library isn't always where I left it yesterday. Such small details point to a larger, unsettling truth. Hogwarts does not exist to serve its students. The students serve the will of the castle. One vivid example arises in Prisoner of Azkaban when Harry is navigating the corridors at night under the invisibility cloak. The text describes him turning a corner and realizing that the passage he had walked countless times before no longer led to the charms corridor, but instead to a tapestry depicting trolls in tutus. What seems like a whimsical diversion hides an ominous fact. The castle deliberately led him away. Was it protecting him from Filch and Snape, who were patrolling nearby, or was it simply exercising control, uncaring of his intentions? The uncertainty itself is the danger. A building that refuses to remain consistent cannot be fully trusted, no matter how many memories are made within its walls. The danger is magnified at night. When the torches flicker low and the corridors stretch into shadows, Hogwarts reveals its harsher character. Imagine a first year, frightened and alone, watching as the hallway behind them seals into solid stone, while the way ahead spirals into an unfamiliar descent. The child does not know if they are heading toward the Great Hall or deeper into the bowels of the castle. The dungeons have seen centuries of use. Some doors open only once in 100 years. In such a setting, being lost is not a matter of patience, but a matter of survival. Without food, light, or a guiding voice, even a single night could become perilous. Filch himself, the caretaker, often hinted at the castle's cruelty. His mutterings about vanishing steps and rooms that trap you were dismissed by students as bitter exaggerations, yet there is truth in them. Neville Longbottom once found himself locked in a corridor that simply had no exits anymore, until Professor McGonagall discovered him shivering in the dark. The incident was remembered as comic, but the underlying reality is terrifying. A corridor had reshaped itself into a cage. How many other times had such things occurred without rescue arriving so quickly? The Marauders, those mischief makers of another generation, learned the patterns of the castle by necessity. Their map was not only a prankster's tool but a lifeline. James, Sirius, Remus, and Peter charted passages that appeared and vanished, documenting the whims of the living stone. Their work suggests that Hogwarts' transformations were not random but followed rhythms like tides or lunar cycles. If that is true, then the castle is not just alive but purposeful, testing and restraining its inhabitants according to some ancient logic. Harry's generation inherited their map, but without it, how many more nights would have ended in terror? The legend of the Room of Requirement further proves the castle's dual nature. On one hand, the room could save lives, providing food and refuge during the battle against Voldemort. On the other, it could destroy, as when Draco Malfoy unwittingly unleashed fiendfire within its walls in Deathly Hallows. The same space that nurtured could also annihilate. This duality lies at the heart of the castle's design. A place that grants sanctuary but also hides mortal peril is no mere school. It is a crucible, forging strength at a terrible cost. What is striking is how many deaths and disappearances are quietly omitted from the official history. Ghosts wander the halls, nearly headless Nick, the Bloody Baron, the Grey Lady, all tethered to the site of their demise. Yet how many unnamed spirits may linger unseen, the result of being trapped in some forgotten passage or sealed behind a shifting wall? Hogwarts enchantments are ancient, and ancient magic rarely discriminates between mischief and malice. The films portray the castle as protective, but the texts suggest a structure that consumes as much as it shelters. The shifting nature of Hogwarts also mirrors the inner fears of its inhabitants. For Harry, who often felt alone and uncertain, the castle became a maze, reflecting his struggle for direction. For Hermione, its unpredictability mocked her desire for order and rules. For Neville, it was a constant reminder of inadequacy, throwing him into humiliating mishaps. Each student confronted not only the subjects on the timetable, but also the trials imposed by the sentient stone. To survive Hogwarts was to adapt to its moods, to accept that walls might move and staircases might betray. Even Dumbledore, with all his wisdom, spoke of the castle as if it were a creature rather than a building. He told Harry once that help will always be given at Hogwarts to those who ask for it. Yet the help was never guaranteed from the walls themselves. Dumbledore's words imply that it was the community, the people, who responded, not the stone. The castle remained indifferent, watching silently as generations of children wandered through its shifting veins, sometimes aiding them, sometimes testing them, sometimes abandoning them altogether. Imagine, then, the terror of a child stumbling through such a labyrinth at night, corridors dissolving behind them, stairs collapsing into voids, doors refusing to open. The films offer spectacle but little sense of dread. The books whisper of it, in fleeting lines and throwaway jokes, yet beneath those hints lies a haunting reality. Hogwarts is alive, and like all living things, it has a will of its own. It challenges, it conceals, it provokes. For those who grew within its embrace, survival was not only about learning spells and potions, but about navigating the silent, watchful enchantments embedded in every stone. The greatest danger was not Voldemort lurking beyond the grounds or dark creatures hiding in the Forbidden Forest. The greatest danger was the castle itself, whose walls shifted like puzzles, whose staircases betrayed their climbers, and whose corridors sometimes led only to fear. To live in Hogwarts was to live inside a living riddle, one that tested not only bravery, but endurance. And though Harry and his friends endured, countless unnamed children may have discovered that the walls of Hogwarts do not merely protect, they also ensnare. Number 21. Summoned spirits and magical experiments. The walls of Hogwarts carry secrets more dangerous than even the Forbidden Forest, for within the very classrooms, students often toyed with forces they barely understood. The danger did not always come from curses or hexes hurled in duels, but from experiments gone wrong, when ambition and curiosity drew young witches and wizards into the perilous borderland between learning and disaster. The books give us brief glimpses of such incidents, often masked by humour or treated as minor misfortunes. Yet beneath the surface lies a darker truth. Students frequently unleash things they could not control, and sometimes the teachers themselves were responsible for guiding them into danger. Gilderoy Lockhart's year as Professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts remains infamous. J.K. Rowling herself wrote that, on practical lessons with Professor Lockhart, there were usually explosions and escapes of creatures. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. What seems like comic relief in the narrative becomes more sinister when one pauses to imagine the reality. Explosions in a classroom full of minors are not harmless. Escaped creatures, even those considered low-level threats, can wreak havoc in an environment as vast and labyrinthine as Hogwarts. A Cornish pixie set loose in a classroom is trouble enough, but when multiplied or provoked, the consequences are catastrophic. The films reduce these events to a brief spectacle, but the books suggest repeated occurrences that were never fully contained. Consider the pixie incident itself. Lockhart brought cages of them into the classroom, expecting his fame to substitute for competence. The creatures immediately escaped and began attacking students, pulling hair, tearing books and smashing glass. Neville Longbottom was lifted by the ears and hung from the chandelier. A moment played for humour, but in truth it represented the uncontrolled summoning of malicious spirits of chaos. A single pixie might be mischievous, but dozens working together could easily incapacitate a room of children. Imagine if one had flown into the hospital wing and shattered vials of volatile potions, or descended into the kitchens. Startling. The house elves mid-brew. The containment of such forces required more than a waving wand. It demanded mastery of magical lore, which Lockhart lacked entirely. This kind of danger was not unique to Lockhart's incompetence. Hogwarts has a long history of magical mishaps, especially when students tried summoning or conjuring beyond their skill. Young wizards, eager to prove themselves, often attempted spells too advanced, drawing energies they could not direct back to safety. Fred and George Weasley experimented with dangerous concoctions in hidden corners of the castle, selling sweets that could cause uncontrollable nosebleeds or vomiting. While their inventions amused students, they risked creating unstable magical reactions, a sweet infused with improperly brewed shrinking. Solution could theoretically collapse a student's airway, a risk never addressed openly. These experiments blurred the line between invention and recklessness, and the protective walls of Hogwarts were not always enough to shield everyone from consequences. One of the most chilling examples lies in the summoning of spirits. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Professor Moody, really Barty Crouch Jr., demonstrated the unforgivable curses to a fourth-year class. Though technically a controlled lesson, the act of casting such magic within the school carried immense risk. The imperious curse bent the will of living beings, forcing them to act against their nature. The Cruciatus curse inflicted agony that could scar the mind permanently. Even in demonstration, these spells brought dark energy into the castle, and there is reason to believe that repeated exposure left an imprint. Some magical theories suggest that such concentrated acts of cruelty can summon lingering echoes, fragments of pain that attach to the stones themselves. If so, the corridors of Hogwarts may have absorbed more than laughter and joy. They may have become haunted by residues of suffering. The tendency of Hogwarts to breed unintended consequences extends beyond curses. In The Half-Blood Prince, we read of students practicing spells from Harry's borrowed textbook, annotated by Severus Snape. Many of these charms and hexes were untested in a classroom environment, and their effects were unpredictable. The infamous spell Sectum Sempra, used by Harry against Draco Malfoy, nearly cost a student his life. What the book presented as a secret discovery was in fact a lethal curse lurking in the margins of a schoolbook, a reminder that magical knowledge carries a weight far heavier than most adolescents can bear. Each attempt to test those spells was an experiment conducted without oversight, risking bloodshed in the quiet corners of the castle. What makes these experiments particularly alarming is not just the potential for harm, but the near certainty that some of them went unnoticed. Hogwarts is vast, with countless unused rooms, hidden passages, and chambers. Students determined to hide their failures could easily dispose of evidence or cover their tracks. Peeves, the poltergeist, himself a kind of summoned spirit of misrule, thrived in the chaos students created, suggesting that failed experiments may even have fed his power. If creatures or echoes were released in those hidden places, who is to say they did not linger, biding their time for another generation of students to stumble upon them. There is one subtle reference in The Prisoner of Azkaban that reveals how fragile safety could be. During a divination class, Professor Trelawney warned students that their dabbling in scrying and prophecy might open doors better left closed. Although most students laughed off her ominous tone, she was not entirely wrong. Divination, by its nature, called upon forces outside the wizard's conscious control. An unfocused attempt could draw unwanted attention from spiritual entities, some benign, others malevolent. If a young seer concentrated too deeply without protection, the result might not be a harmless crystal ball vision, but a breach inviting something across. The danger was subtle, but no less real. Hogwarts was no stranger to creatures that should never have been there. The Chamber of Secrets contained a basilisk placed centuries earlier, but awakened by the opening of a door. What the basilisk represents is the culmination of magical arrogance, an ancient experiment left dormant, only to return and endanger children centuries later. This is precisely the sort of danger that careless summoning or magical tinkering can unleash. Once a spirit or creature is brought into the castle, expelling it may prove impossible. Hogwarts is both fortress and prison, and sometimes the bars hold things within rather than keeping them out. Even teachers could be reckless experimenters. Horace Slughorn encouraged advanced potion brewing, allowing students to attempt complicated drafts with unpredictable side effects. In The Half-Blood Prince, the class brewed Draught of Living Death, a potion requiring deadly ingredients like asphodel and wormwood. A minor miscalculation could have poisoned half the room. Slughorn trusted talent to outweigh risk, but his classroom was one failed stir away from tragedy. Students like Hermione Granger thrived in precision, but others like Seamus Finnegan were notorious for accidents. Imagine if such a volatile mixture exploded. It would not be a harmless puff of smoke, but a lethal cloud of toxins. Magical creatures themselves were often part of the curriculum, another invitation to peril. Hagrid's enthusiasm for dangerous beasts led him to present blast-ended Scroots, hybrid creatures no one fully understood. They stung, exploded, and grew unpredictably. Their very existence was the result of magical meddling, likely involving the forced breeding of incompatible species. The Ministry of Magic considered them too unstable to classify. Yet they crawled across Hogwarts grounds, endangering students who barely knew how to defend themselves. One cannot help but imagine that in hidden corners of the school, other creatures born of forgotten experiments still linger. The haunting truth is that the film sanitized much of this chaos, presenting Hogwarts as a place where danger was episodic and ultimately overcome. The books, however, hint at an undercurrent of constant risk, a place where every lesson carried the possibility of summoning something that would not return quietly to its cage. A mispronounced incantation, a misplaced stir of a cauldron, or an ill-advised charm could call forth entities that clung to the shadows long after the bell rang. The students laughed, the teachers scolded, but the castle remembered. There are whispers among magical historians that Hogwarts itself is partly alive, shaped by centuries of magic absorbed into its very stones. Every experiment, every spell, every summoning leaves a trace. In this way, the castle becomes a vast archive of magical residue, storing echoes of everything cast within its walls. The implication is chilling. Even if a spirit or creature were dismissed, its echo might remain, wandering unseen. Perhaps this explains why staircases shift, or why portraits sometimes speak words that no painter taught them. The students see eccentricity, the castle might be groaning with accumulated spells. In the end, the danger is not that one specific experiment could unleash a monster. It is that the culture of Hogwarts encouraged risk, nurtured ambition, and sometimes ignored the consequences. The films gave us duels and dragons, but the real peril often walked silently in corridors born from experiments too small to notice until it was too late. Hogwarts was a sanctuary of learning, yes, but also a crucible of reckless magic, where every student carried within their wand the possibility of summoning something that might never leave. The most frightening thought is that even now, long after Harry's time, something conjured by a careless hand might still be wandering the hidden corridors, waiting. Number 22. Living armor and statues. The enchanted armor and stone guardians of Hogwarts stand silently in the corridors, yet their presence is far more ominous than the films allowed us to see. The books made clear that these decorations were not simply lifeless ornaments. J.K. Rowling described them as strangely aware, almost restless, as if the walls themselves breathed with vigilance. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, the line lingers. Sometimes it seemed that the knights in armor were watching him or changing their poses. The unsettling image of metal shells shifting in the flickering torchlight suggests a constant undercurrent of danger. The school is not just a place of learning, but a labyrinth where the guardians are as unpredictable as the staircases. The enchanted suits of armor are not merely props of magical engineering. They are conduits of spells, complex enchantments bound into iron and steel, given a kind of awareness without thought, a reflex without a soul. Professor Flitwick, with his expertise in charms, was one of the professors capable of managing such enchantments. Yet, what happens if the magic cracks? A spell of animation, once corrupted, does not simply stop. It twists, misinterprets, and lashes out. A suit of armor, taller and heavier than most adults, could swing a halberd with crushing force. No first year armed with a wand could hope to defend themselves against such an accident. And Hogwarts, built with layer upon layer of ancient magic, is a place where spells do sometimes go astray. One of the more telling episodes occurs long before the climactic battle in the Deathly Hallows, when the statues and suits of armor are called to defend the castle. Professor McGonagall commands, "Hogwarts is threatened. Man the boundaries. Protect us. Do your duty to our school." The stone warriors obeyed. Their ability to act immediately and fight without hesitation proves that they were always capable of violence, waiting in a dormant state. If they could be stirred so easily at the words of a teacher, how secure was the enchantment that kept them still during ordinary school days? The danger lies not only in outside attackers, but in the very guardians that line the corridors. Students often treated these figures with the same wary curiosity one might grant a portrait. Harry, Ron, and Hermione frequently passed suits of armor during their nocturnal wanderings. There were hints that they were not as passive as they seemed. Peeves, the poltergeist, once stuffed a suit of armor with dung bombs, and the resulting explosion rattled the halls. The fact that the armor could be tampered with shows how porous the protective enchantments were. If a mischievous ghost could interfere, what prevented darker forces from exploiting the same weakness? It is chilling to imagine a first-year student slipping out after curfew, only to be confronted by a helmet that suddenly turns its gaze. The castle itself seemed to enjoy testing its inhabitants. In Chamber of Secrets, Rowling notes how Hogwarts is alive in its own way, with shifting staircases and doors that resist opening. If the staircases could suddenly shift beneath a student's feet, sending them tumbling into unknown corridors, then why should the statues not shift a little more aggressively? One cannot forget that the school was built in the 10th century by founders who mingled brilliance with ruthlessness. Salazar Slytherin, in particular, left behind his monstrous basilisk as a security measure. Would it be so surprising if the Knights of Iron and Guardians of Stone were also designed to be more weapon than decoration? The overlooked danger becomes clearer when you think of how students are trained. First years struggle to master the levitation charm, while the very walls around them are packed with enchantments powerful enough to animate battalions. If an error or surge of uncontrolled energy interfered with those enchantments, a 12-year-old would be utterly defenseless. Even Harry, during his third year, was troubled by the sensation of being watched by the empty helmets. The unease was not childish imagination, it was foreshadowing. The school taught defense against the dark arts, yet the school itself contained silent forces that could have turned into predators. There is a chilling irony here. the Ministry of Magic was endlessly concerned about safety, restricting underage magic, regulating broomsticks, limiting creatures. But the most lethal hazards were ignored. In Order of the Phoenix, the Ministry placed Dolores Umbridge in the school, armed with decrees about quills and uniforms, while outside her office, the armors stood in perfect readiness to become death machines. What use was bureaucracy against the quiet possibility of enchanted guardians misfiring? The contrast reveals that danger at Hogwarts was less about what lurked outside and more about the castle's own secrets. Specific examples highlight the peril. When the Weasley twins set off fireworks during Umbridge's reign, one of the explosions blasted a suit of armor apart. Rowling wrote that the armor fell into pieces, clattering loudly across the floor. Yet how quickly it could have risen, stitched back together by its magic, and swung a blade toward the nearest figure. The very fact that the armor was hollow and empty did not reduce its menace, it amplified it. No cries of pain, no hesitation, just the blind execution of enchantments. Imagine a corridor filled with dozens of these constructs, shifting as one, against which spells might bounce like pebbles on stone. Portraits at Hogwarts were known to whisper, to move from frame to frame, to spy and report. The living statues were different. They had no personality, no faces to betray them, only silence. Their danger lay in unpredictability. When Hermione quoted, "Sometimes it seemed that the knights in armor were watching him or changing their poses," it revealed a truth the films never explored. The statues were part of the architecture, but they were also part of the narrative threat. They symbolized a school where knowledge and menace shared the same corridor. They were not allies, not enemies, but potential accidents waiting to unfold. The broader question becomes one of responsibility. If a suit of armor, enchanted by a long-dead wizard, suddenly crushed a student, who would bear the blame? Could a professor be held accountable for a charm they did not cast? Or does the castle itself, this semi-sentient fortress, become the guilty party? The question haunts the reader. Hogwarts is both sanctuary and hazard. Its dangers are excused because of its prestige. Yet when you peel back the romantic image, you find a labyrinth of lurking threats. The armors and statues, in their quiet menace, represent the core paradox of the school, safety built upon unstable magic. Consider how the students learned to normalize the threat. They walked past the statues daily, grew accustomed to their looming presence, and whispered nervously about how they sometimes moved. That normalization mirrors real human behavior, how people live with dangers they cannot change. The students could not dismantle the guardians, could not re-enchant them, could not even report their unease without being dismissed as childish. Instead, they learned to live with it, to study charms and potions under the gaze of iron helmets. It is an unsettling reminder that Hogwarts raised not only wizards, but survivors. The most dramatic revelation came only in the final battle. When Professor McGonagall summoned the Guardians, she treated them as soldiers, not ornaments. They fought alongside the defenders, striking with blades and crushing with stone fists. The readers finally saw what had been implied for years. These were not passive sculptures, but hidden warriors. The films, by limiting their movement to this climactic scene, concealed the ongoing risk. But the books left the attentive reader unsettled. The threat had been present all along, ignored because it had not yet been unleashed. Hogwarts thrives on ambiguity. It is both wonder and nightmare, both sanctuary and trap. The enchanted suits of armor and statues embody that duality. They could serve nobly, protecting students from Death Eaters, or they could turn into instruments of chaos if the magic faltered. The line between guardian and predator is as thin as the stability of an old spell. Every time Harry hurried down a corridor, every time Ron muttered about the unsettling gaze of a helmet, every time Hermione clutched her books tighter as a shadow shifted on stone, the reader was reminded that Hogwarts itself could turn dangerous without warning. The danger is not just physical but symbolic. The statues remind us that power without will is terrifying. A knight of iron has no conscience. It kills not out of malice, but because it was commanded, or because the command broke apart and left only violence. In this way, the statues mirror the darker side of magic, spells without morality, charms without choice. They are warnings embodied in steel and granite that magic detached from humanity is no different from machinery gone rogue, and that warning echoes throughout the series, even if the films chose to glance away. Finally, one must remember that Hogwarts is not only a school, but a stage where ancient spells play themselves out. The knights in armor and the stone guardians are not just curiosities, they are part of the living danger of the castle. Rowling hinted at this danger with quiet lines, with unsettling descriptions, with glimpses that made readers shiver. The true peril was not the basilisk nor even the dementors, but the realization that the very walls could wake up. The students lived among these silent protectors, always one miscast spell away from disaster. And the haunting question remains, if the guardians turned, would anyone survive the night? Number 23, Owls and their nightly flights. The first thing every reader remembers about Hogwarts Mail is how enchanting it looked on screen. Majestic owls swooping down from the enchanted ceiling, letters dropping gracefully into the hands of waiting students, the flutter of wings and the shimmer of candlelight. But when we turn back to the books, J.K. Rowling actually hints at something much more chaotic, even dangerous. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the description is not delicate at all. Hundreds of owls streamed into the great hall, circling the tables until they saw their owners and dropping letters and packages onto their laps. The vision is full of feathers, clattering wings and collisions. In fact, Ron nearly had his breakfast ruined when a swooping owl almost overturned a bowl of porridge right onto his head. This single moment makes us question how safe this magical tradition really was for young students. Imagine being an 11-year-old first year, barely used to the moving staircases, and suddenly you are thrust into a scene where hundreds of birds swoop overhead with no concern for manners. Owls, no matter how well trained, are still predators. Their talons are sharp enough to catch rodents, their beaks strong enough to break bones. When one considers that they are not simply gliding elegantly but diving between candlelit tables, balancing heavy packages, and trying to land in crowded spaces, the image becomes less charming and far more unsettling. The Great Hall becomes less like a school dining room and more like a crowded aviary where the risk of accidents is constant. The danger does not lie only in the risk of spilled food. There are direct references in the books that show how easily an owl could have hurt someone. Take Errol, the Weasley family's elderly owl. Errol was constantly crashing into windows, knocking himself out, and misjudging distances. In Chamber of Secrets, he faints after hitting the window at the burrow. Now picture Errol, or a younger, stronger owl, carrying a heavy parcel and mistiming a swoop in the Great Hall. If he can knock himself out against glass, what happens when a beak collides with a human head? If a talon brushes a student's cheek while the owl fights for balance, there is no doubt scars would remain. Yet the films polished all of this away, leaving only the picturesque image of orderly deliveries. The books also describe how packages were sometimes far from light or harmless. When Molly Weasley sent Harry a Christmas jumper, the parcel was bulky. When Sirius sent Harry a firebolt broomstick in Prisoner of Azkaban, the delivery was potentially catastrophic. A broomstick is long, awkward, and solid wood. Hedwig, Harry's snowy owl, delivered small items faithfully, but she could never have carried something as large as a broom. That meant other owls, possibly multiple, had to work together. Now imagine the entry of 2 or 3 owls straining with the weight of a broom over a crowded hall. A single slip could have turned Sirius's generous gift into a missile aimed at a table full of unsuspecting children. Even lighter packages could cause mayhem. Take the example of the daily profit deliveries. Students subscribed to the paper, and owls often demanded payment by pecking the students until they coughed up coins. In Goblet of Fire, Ron's owl pigwidgeon repeatedly swooped around, agitated and noisy, until paid. This detail may seem humorous, but in reality it shows that the owls were not always calm or obedient. A bird pecking furiously at your hand in the middle of breakfast, surrounded by dozens of other winged creatures, is hardly a safe scenario. A child could easily be scratched or injured by accident, especially when the owl insists on immediate payment. The films also erase the grim detail of droppings and feathers, both of which the books imply. Hundreds of birds inside a dining hall every day would inevitably leave mess behind. The description of them bursting into the room, wings beating, feathers scattering, makes this clear. Owls are not sterile messengers, they are animals. What appears magical in a quick film scene would in reality mean constant sanitation concerns, with feathers floating into porridge, droppings staining the stone floor, and students ducking to avoid an unpleasant surprise. Filmmakers spared us this vision, but readers can't help but notice how dangerous and unsanitary it truly was. Hedwig, often presented as a symbol of loyalty and grace, was not free of accidents either. In Order of the Phoenix, she was attacked on her way to deliver mail and returned with her feathers ruffled and injuries that had to be treated by Professor Grubbly Plank. This episode alone demonstrates that owls were exposed to dangers outside Hogwarts, weather, predators, even magical interference. A bird returning wounded is not just a tragic detail, but a reminder that these creatures were constantly risking harm for the sake of mail delivery. If this happened outside the castle, what was to prevent similar risks inside? A panicked or injured owl entering the hall could have caused chaos. Consider also the candlelight floating above the great hall tables. Hundreds of wax candles hovered in midair, dripping occasionally. Now mix this with birds flying at speed. An owl brushing against a candle could have knocked hot wax onto students or even risked fire if feathers caught alight. While this disaster never happened in the books, the potential was always there. The scene of birds colliding with floating flames while children ate breakfast paints a very different picture of Hogwarts, one not of whimsical magic, but of constant risk hidden beneath the surface. The sharpness of owl talons is another overlooked detail. A great horned owl in the real world can exert over 500 pounds of pressure with its grip. Even smaller species are capable of piercing human skin with ease. Every morning and evening, Hogwarts children stretched out their arms to receive letters, sometimes without protective gloves. Harry himself often held out bare hands for Hedwig. A single misjudged landing could leave deep scratches. Multiply this by hundreds of owls every day, and the statistical likelihood of injury skyrockets. Yet we never hear of a student needing the hospital wing for lacerations. The absence of such stories is almost suspiciously convenient. The darker side of owlpost delivery is hinted at when howlers appear. In Chamber of Secrets, Ron receives a howler from Molly Weasley. The red envelope explodes into sound, filling the great hall with Molly's furious voice. But beyond embarrassment, the very arrival of howlers is accompanied by violence. They smoke, burn, and sometimes shred themselves after being read. An owl carrying such a magical object is transporting a letter that can burst into flame. Again, what if the owl dropped it on the wrong table? What if it ignited mid-air? The hazard extends not only from the birds, but from the magical objects they delivered. The chaos of the mail system becomes even clearer when we remember that owls did not limit themselves to breakfast. Deliveries could occur at any hour. Students sleeping in dormitories might be disturbed by scratching at the window or a bird forcing its way in. Harry himself was woken on several occasions by Hedwig arriving late at night with messages. The romantic idea of nocturnal post quickly turns eerie when one imagines talons scrabbling at the glass, wings beating in the dark, and children waking to find a bird thrusting a letter into their hands. Hogwarts life was already filled with stress from classes and magical dangers. Restless nights, courtesy of the owl post, only added to the toll. There is also the issue of allergies and phobias. Hundreds of feathers, dander, and the overwhelming smell of birds inside a communal hall would have been difficult for many students. Hermione, for instance, suffered with Crookshanks's fur constantly shedding. It is not hard to imagine some Muggle-born child arriving with an allergy to feathers, only to find every meal invaded by winged creatures. The films never acknowledge this practical discomfort, but in the books, the presence of owls is constant and unavoidable, painting Hogwarts as a place where comfort is often sacrificed for tradition.